This is the Thriving Artist Podcast with Andrea Fleming, where we talk about how to go from surviving as an artist to thriving as an artist. Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back. Right away, I just want to say, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and like and comment. And if you're listening in on Spotify, don't forget to subscribe and also leave a review and let me know all the things that you like that I'm doing and tell me how much you love me. I'm just kidding. But let me know what's working really, really well for you on these podcasts and what you would like to hear more of. Okay, let's jump in. For this episode, I want you to actually have a journal with you because this one is a very interactive episode. It's going to be teaching you how to love auditions more. And that is very important because if you are an theater artist or a musician and you audition a lot to get your work, it's kind of important for you to at least not hate your auditions. But I notice a lot of performers hate auditioning, and it gets in the way of them not only enjoying their career, but booking a lot of work. And so I wanted to talk about this topic because it's actually accessible for you to love auditions. And if you think it's not accessible now, at least we can get you to the point of not hating the auditions. And then maybe eventually you want to consider loving auditions, because I used to be that way. I used to hate auditions, and then I was sick of hating auditions. So eventually I figured out how to really love auditions. And now it's one of my favorite parts of being a performer is auditioning for shows. Even sometimes when I'm doing a show, I have rehearsals and I get kind of upset that I can't go to auditions. It's kind of messed up. So anyway, grab your journal. And if you are not a performing artist and you just like to listen to this podcast because it fills you up as an artist outside of performing. So let's say you're like a visual artist or a painter or a sculptor or something like that, or what other kinds of art are there? What do you guys do? You write? If you do something like that, and auditioning is not how you get work, but you want to follow along and learn how you can like your process for getting work, I think this can apply as well because I use this for quite a lot of things. So have your pen ready. First thing I want to say, which I already started with saying why it's so important, because if you hate auditions, it doesn't make it fun and it makes it hard for you to book work. But I want to get into the details about that a little bit, because in my experience and what I've noticed with a lot of people that I work with is that there are like 5 common things that happen when you really don't like auditioning that put a damper on your career. And one of the biggest things that I notice is that when you don't like auditions, this seems obvious, but a lot of times people just don't do them. They'll like avoid doing auditions because they don't like them. But then that ends up meaning that they don't ever work as an artist. So it kind of makes it hard if you want to be an artist, if you don't like auditions and you end up avoiding them. Another big one that I've noticed, this was a big one for me, is when I did not like auditions, it actually added to my performance anxiety. So I had really bad performance anxiety for many, many years. And because I didn't like auditions, it only made it worse when I would show up to auditions to try to book a job because I was already anxious. And then I would be like, fuck, I don't want to be here. And then I would get even more anxious. So it ended up actually hindering my ability to perform in auditions. So the result of that was actually that it prevented me from booking work. So, so far, the first 2 prevents you from booking work, right? You like avoid doing auditions, or you get anxiety, so it like sabotages your auditions. The third one that I noticed that's really, really common, that I actually did too, I did all of these, is that you don't bring joy into the audition room. And this one is something that I didn't even realize was important until I started to like auditions more, is that when you show up and you really like auditions, you actually enjoy what you're doing, you actually are excited to present your performance and your work to people, is you actually bring joy into the audition room. And it creates this kind of connection between you and like the casting team, the accompanist, if you are a singer or something like that, that it like lifts up the room, it lifts up the energy of the room. And I noticed that made a huge impact because the audition people they're literally in there all day listening to people scream at them if they're singers, or listening to people do really heavy, intense monologues, or listening or watching people dance for hours. And they're like doing that for hours and hours a day. And then they have to go home and they have to sort through all their materials. And then they have to wake up and do something else for a different show. And then they have to like interact with. So they're like always working on casting the show, and it could be a heavy experience for them. So what I noticed was I would walk into an audition room, and before, when I didn't love auditions, I would be super, super heavy with the anxiety of auditioning. And I would greet them with that heaviness, and they would be like, oh yeah, hey. And then I would do my piece and I would be all anxious, and I wouldn't like perform well. So they didn't have anything to get excited about. And they would just be like, okay, thank you. But when I started to love auditions more and I started to do better at my auditions, and I would enter the room with lots of energy and joy and excitement for the process, I noticed that like it would have them look up from the computer and be like, oh my gosh, who is this person? Hi, how are you? Like such a huge transformation, if you will, of experience between the two groups of people, between me and the auditioners. It just instilled a sense of connection and, I guess, excitement for them as well. So what you'll notice if you have that experience is that it kind of makes, I've noticed, and I've heard casting directors say this before, is when you enter the room with that kind of energy, is it like makes them want you to do well, right? It makes them, it like has them cheering you on through the whole process. So if I walked into the room with lower energy and I made mistakes, I noticed that they kind of were just like, yeah, you're kind of mediocre. Like that was their energy towards me. Versus now when I walk in the room, I still make lots of mistakes, but I notice they're wanting me to perform really well. I get a lot more good feedback. I feel like maybe what happens is because they're like excited and because they're paying more attention to me and they have that instant connection, they pay more attention to my strengths, possibly, and less attention to my mistakes. Or maybe I'm just better. I don't know. But I do notice that it changes the energy. The fourth thing that I notice is when I don't love my auditions and when other people don't love their auditions is they don't put the same energy into preparation. And it might mean that they don't do preparation at all if they're not looking forward to their auditions, or that the quality of preparation is not good. So for me, what that looks like was when I had lots of anxiety, I didn't love the process, I would, even when I did prepare for my auditions, I would do it in the like most self-deprecating, angry way. I was always focused on my flaws, and I never focused on my strengths. And I would be so hard on myself that I would get all tense. And especially when it came to like my singing auditions, it would make me do worse in my practice sessions. So I would practice really bad technique. I would practice really bad performance. And then it would kind of spiral out of control from there. So all of my preparation was useless pretty much. And with the same thing for monologues, like if I even did them, because I do not like doing monologues, that's one that I will have to change. But back then when I hated auditions, like I hated auditions and I had this thought that I hated monologues, and I would either not practice them at all, or I would like try to get through it as quickly as possible. And I would not do any emotional prep for it. I would try to memorize my lines really fast. And if I could get through one run with my lines memorized, I'd be like, okay, I'm done. And I wouldn't put any time or energy into it. So when you don't love your auditions, common experience that a lot of performers have is that they don't do good preparation for it. And then the fifth really common one is that it slowly degrades your emotional health every time you do an audition. So aside from all of the things that we just mentioned, even if you do prep, even if you go to the audition, even if you have a day where you don't have lots of anxiety, you go into the room and you don't like it and you don't enjoy the experience, even if you feel like you did a good job, you walk out of there feeling like I still hate auditions, and this wasn't fun, and you exit the room with a lower emotional and energetic state. And if you're doing auditions like I do a lot throughout the week, like a couple auditions a day, or maybe like 15 auditions per week, and you're going in live all the time, over time, that's going to degrade your emotional health. You're just going to be in a bad mood all the time, which I was like, I would go to auditions and like not feel good about my auditions and not like the process and just hate the whole experience. And I would just feel terrible for the rest of the day. And I would be mean to myself, and I would be resistant to doing more prep for the auditions that were coming up. And I would want to cancel auditions. I would like go home and be like, maybe I shouldn't go to my auditions tomorrow. So all of these experiences, if you notice, like they tend to lead to not booking work, or at least not doing well and not booking as much work as you want to. So see if these apply to you. And if you notice like more coming up, what else do you notice coming up? What impact does it have when you don't love your auditions or when you hate auditions on your behavior and how you show up in the room? We have to know why we have that behavior, right? Why we have that experience with auditions, what makes us have that resistance to doing the preparation, or have the anxiety, or not prepare, what makes us not like that whole experience. And the reason we want to know what creates that is because if we can get to the root cause, then we can change the root cause of it, and then we can have a better experience overall. So I want to share the 5 common ones that came up for me and that come up for my clients. The most common thoughts that people have about auditions that make you not want to do them and that make you not want to prepare for them. The first one is having the thought like they're not looking for anyone, or it's already cast. This one is actually very common among performers in general. I've noticed, at least in the theater world, is everyone always thinks that all the shows are already cast and that they're never looking for anyone. And so every time I go to an audition room, it's just a room full of grumpy people thinking that they're wasting their time. And even I still, like, from time to time, have this thought of like, I don't think they're actually looking for anyone. Like, maybe I shouldn't go to that. Actually, this morning I did that. Maybe I shouldn't go to this audition because I don't think they're actually looking for anyone. And what happens when you have that thought frequently, though, for a lot of different auditions, is you end up deciding ahead of time that it's not worth your time and that you don't want to be there and that you shouldn't put any work in for it. And of course, if you're having that thought, you're going to feel, one thing that I feel is frustrated. Frustrated, like I'm wasting my time. Another thought is they won't like me or they're judging me. This one was a huge one for me. I always thought that people were not going to like the work that I put out and that they were going to judge me and think that I was terrible. And of course, if you're feeling that way, if you're thinking that, you're probably feeling insecure, or you're feeling anxious. Was a big one for me, anxious and insecure. And having that experience, having that thought and that feeling will have you, again, even if you do show up in a way that you are just tense and tight and like not showing your full self and not showing your full range of motion and all of your skills. And it's going to have you zooming in on all the things that you do really, really bad. The third one that I notice is they're rude and they don't pay attention. This one is sneaky because it seems like it's not even about you. It seems like it's just a fact of the world that when you go into auditions, the casting team doesn't care and they are rude and they don't want you and they don't care about the people that they're auditioning. But what's interesting is if you question this thought and you start to look for evidence that maybe they're not rude and maybe they are paying attention, that it produces a change in you and it has you show up differently. And sometimes that has them respond to you differently. Like I was mentioning earlier, when I used to have this thought of they're rude, they aren't paying attention, along with the other thoughts, like they're not going to like me and it's going to suck. Of course, then they weren't engaged with the work that I was doing. They did not care about the work that I was doing. Versus when I would go in and be like, you know what? I love what I do. I'm just here to connect with people. I'm just here to show my work. And entering the room with that energy, excited and ready to connect with them, it created the atmosphere where they felt more comfortable connecting with me. Like they looked up from their computer or they looked up from my resume and they actually acknowledged my existence. The fourth thought is, I won't do a good job. So, of course, when you're thinking, I won't do a good job, it makes you feel afraid or insecure. And that's when you decide that you don't want to show up in the first place, or you get anxiety and you don't want to do the work to prepare. The fifth thought is, they require too much. It's too much work, time, or energy, implying that you actually don't have the time and energy available to do what's required. This one is another sneaky one because it seems like it's just, again, a truth of the industry, something that's happening outside of you. And a lot of times I notice that when people have this thought, they feel a lot of resentment toward auditioning. They feel a lot of maybe even frustration or anger toward the industry or toward the people who are holding the auditions, like the casting team or the creative team. And again, even if you decide to go in the room, that energy reads and you don't actually connect with the people behind the table. And what I notice a lot of time is that it causes people to throw away their auditions. So like, even if you are very skilled and talented at what you do, and you, let's say you memorize all your lines or you memorize your song very well, you go in and you aren't completely present, and it's almost like you don't care about presenting your best work. So you kind of just like present a half-ass version of the work that you have prepared. So with these top 5 thoughts, all of these create feelings of like insecurity, resentment, anxiety is a common one, fear, anger. And all of these thoughts tend to lead to those 5 ways of showing up that we mentioned earlier, which is doing less auditions, showing up and not bringing joy into the room, not preparing, or like having slowly degrading your emotional health because you go in and you're just like, this is terrible, and then you carry that with you for the rest of the day. I encourage you to also just notice what other thoughts you personally have. What I notice is that a lot of times there are variations of the thought, I won't book, or it won't be worth it. And of course, when that leads to the behavior we talked about, we end up creating exactly what we don't want, which is we either don't book or we don't make the time worth it for us. So what other thoughts do you notice that are variations of that, of like, I won't book or it won't be worth my time? And I want you to notice those thoughts and notice those reasons that you have for showing up the way that you do. And pay attention to when you actually think them, what's the natural inclination? What are you more inclined to do? Are you more inclined to bail on your process and your audition calendar? Or are you more inclined to not prepare all the way? Are you more inclined to still do all the preparation and still show up to auditions, but give like a lackluster performance, or to show up and not be fully present and not be fully connected? What's your experience when you have those? What I notice for myself is when I'm in this place of like not being fully in love with just auditioning in general, is that I tend to pull back mostly in the audition room. So I'm really good at just pushing myself through and getting myself to the audition and just showing up and hustling my way through all of my negative experiences. But when I first started off in the industry, I wasn't able to manage my emotions well enough so that when I got into the room, I was able to connect with people and to do my best work. So I would show up and have all my stuff memorized, and then I would just like freeze and get super anxious, and then my face would go blank, and then my voice would get all constricted. So if I had a musical theater audition, I would like get all like squelchy, screamy in my songs, and then I wouldn't act the song at all. And I got feedback also that I would walk into the room and not acknowledge anybody. I would just be like, hi, and then walk straight to the piano, and then walk straight to my spot, do my song, and then walk to the piano and say bye and then leave. But I wouldn't like sit there and be like, hey, how are you? Hope your day is going well. I wouldn't do any of that stuff. So I would just be very, very anxious and like blank. Versus now, um, I would now when I walk into a room, I feel excited just to be there with the people. And I feel excited just to have an opportunity to perform and do my art. One story that I want to share, this is actually a contrast in showing up with some of the thoughts that lead to not doing the work versus showing up with some of the thoughts that lead to doing the work of preparation and auditioning. And both of these examples are very recent. One is going to an audition with the thought, oh, they're not actually looking for people. And the other is going to audition with the thought that, oh, the show is already cast, but maybe they're looking for replacements. So when I first got back from one of my contracts this year, I put a bunch of auditions on my calendar, and my goal was to book something that was based in New York City. So I had 3 auditions for that week when I came back. And I noticed that one of them had a I think this was for an off-Broadway show. One of them had a pre-off-Broadway showing at some regional theater. So I had the thought about it after I put it on my calendar and I was doing all my prep. I was like, you know what? They probably are just going to transfer that whole cast. So this is going to be a waste of time for me to show up and do this audition. So I actually didn't end up doing it. I decided to go to a different audition instead. Turns out all my friends who went to that audition ended up getting callbacks for it. And I was like kicking myself because I made an assumption about the whole casting process. I made an assumption that they were just going to keep everybody and that I was going to be wasting my time. And because of that, I missed out on an opportunity. Fast forward to a couple of weeks ago, which is like maybe 2 or 3 months from that same experience. I have been working on not doing that, even though I just did it this morning. I've been working on not following through with that thought of, oh, maybe I'm going to waste my time. Maybe they already have a cast. And I went to an audition for a Broadway show maybe 2 weeks ago. And that show is definitely already cast. Like it's running on Broadway. So they have an entire cast already on stage. But I had the thought, you know what? They might be looking for replacements in the future. So why don't I just go and I go interact and network with the casting director, just get to know the casting director, and then show what I can do so that if they happen to be looking for someone in the future, then they have my headshot on file. And I showed up and I was super relaxed and I was very chill. I wasn't feeling too attached to it at all because I knew that they had a cast already. But I was also very open and willing to show up and do my best work because I was holding out for the possibility that eventually they could consider me. And turns out with that one, I actually got a callback for it. So that taught me a very important lesson and valuable lesson that you should never count yourself out. You should never just follow the thought of they probably already have a cast because you never know. Maybe they will be looking for replacements. Even though I did it this morning. And I found out from my friend that they do have a cast, but what do I know? Maybe somebody is going to drop in the future and I decided not to go to that audition. So I'm still working on this with myself. But I want you to imagine like first of all, what is the number one thought that takes you out from really enjoying auditions and showing up and giving it your all? Is it that you think that people aren't going to like you and that they're going to judge you? Is it that you think that everything is always cast and that they're always going to get celebrities and you are never going to be considered? What is that one main thought for you? And I want you to imagine, just consider what else could be true. Like, for example, with this Broadway show that I auditioned for, I knew that it was already cast, but I didn't stop at that's just the truth and I should just let it go. I also considered what else could be true. Well, even though it's already cast, they could be looking for someone in the future. When you do imagine what else could be true about that thought, what do you notice? What do you notice in your emotional response? Does it inspire you to do some more preparation on your auditions? Does it inspire you to look for more casting notices? When you have that emotional experience, what's it like for you when you imagine actually going into the audition room? Do you feel excited to meet the casting team? Do you feel excited to show your work? Also imagine how you would feel when you go into the waiting room. Sometimes when you go into the waiting room and you hate auditions, you also hate everybody around you. And you are like, why are all these people here? There's too many people. I don't want to be around anybody. They're going to think I'm terrible. They're going to hear me outside of the room. Like all kinds of thoughts like that come up. So what happens for you when you imagine what else could be true and you imagine going into the waiting room? And what do you think your experience would be like outside of the audition room when you're lining up to go in? And then what do you think your experience would be like in the audition room when you are about to perform, when you're in the middle of doing your presentation, when you've just finished and you did your final button on your song, or when you hit your last pose in the dance, or when you do the final beat in your monologue? What do you think that feeling would be like when you imagine what else could be true other than they booked or they've cast it already, or they're not going to like me? And then what do you think the rest of your day would be like if you had a different thought about it? One thing that helps me when I'm going through this process is imagining thoughts that are super believable for me, or imagining different perspectives that are really believable for me. So I'm not going to be like, oh, well, Hamilton is already cast, but they're going to fire all their cast tomorrow, and I'm going to be their first consideration. That doesn't work. That's really improbable. So I'm not going to actually believe it if I consider that perspective. So it won't have an impact on me. But if I imagine, oh, Wicked has auditions every 6 months and they're always full and they have files full of people, I know that's probably true. And also, what could be true is they're likely adding to those files frequently because they go through them. They go through the files often when they're auditioning those people for replacements. So they want to refill those files. So they're probably still looking for people in those EPAs or those ECCs or those agent calls. And I'm still in consideration when I go in. So for me, that feels really good if I know that something's cast all the time and they have files of people. It still feels good and makes me inspired to show up and to do my best work when I go in for a call like that. So when you're thinking of those alternative perspectives, what could be true for you and what could be most believable for you? Another thing that really helps me is making sure that when I am considering alternative perspectives, that it actually inspires me to action. If I'm like, oh, that's a nice thought, and then I don't do anything, then I know that that probably didn't work for me. And then I'm probably still actually believing the old thought, and I'm just like deluding myself. Also, if it doesn't make you feel a little bit better about auditioning, it's probably not a super helpful thought right now for you to be considering. So if I am thinking, oh, they cast all of The Lion King, but they could still be looking for people because I know someone who's on the tour and they just booked something else. If that doesn't make you feel a little bit better about auditioning, then perhaps that's not actually the thought you want to be working on. So you want to work on a different thought and change perspective for that. So it could be that they are looking for a replacement, but I still feel terrible about auditioning for it. It's probably because my main thought that's bothering me is that I'm not good enough, or they aren't going to like me, or they're going to think that I did a bad job. So I probably want to work on one of those perspectives. What else could be true about that? And I also consider not worrying about getting my thought absolutely perfect and not worrying about getting all the way to a thought that makes me super ecstatic about auditions. I like to work on one thought at a time and getting it incrementally better and better as I go. So I might just start with, it could be worth it for me to show up because eventually they're going to need new people in the cast. That makes me feel slightly better about auditioning. But eventually I want to get to, it's always worth it for me to show up because they always want someone like me. They're always looking for someone like me. And they could be casting anything else. And when I show up, they want to cast me in something and they're looking for something to cast me in. That's really, really a really good perspective. I just got really inspired by that way of thinking. So don't worry about getting all the way to that, but just focus on getting to a thought that makes you feel a little bit better, that makes it a little bit easier for you to show up and do your preparation and to like auditions a little bit more. And then see what kind of impact that has on you. One final thing I want to share is that if you feel like this was helpful for you and you want to learn how to find all of the other thoughts that are getting in your way of really loving auditions and get help changing those thoughts over time, then I encourage you to first reach out and get on my email list because I share tips every week on how to improve your mindset and how to enjoy your career more and how to increase your odds of booking jobs. Get on my email list there and you will get those tips. And then also, if you want more help with it one-on-one, reach out to me. I'm always available on Instagram. You can DM me, or you can go to my link tree in my bio and sign up for a consultation. Okay, I hope that was helpful. If it was, leave a comment. What else would you like to see? Comment that below, and I will talk to you next time.